Hey everyone, welcome back to Coffee Guy 95. It's been a really long time since I uploaded a video. I was working on my NFL draft grades, um, but unfortunately, just didn't have the time to put in all the work into that, and I feel bad. Of course, I have my career and job outside of just my really what is a hobby for me, this YouTube channel. Um, But college football is already here, and last week was week zero. Last Saturday was week zero. A bit of behind the scenes part of why I've been so absent from here. I just recently got engaged, and it's been a bit of there's been a lot going on behind the scenes just with that relationship, and of course that takes priority over my YouTube channel. So that's kind of a little bit of behind the scenes that nobody asked for, but definitely has had a little bit of an effect on this, and uh, this will probably continue to be just an off and on thing until just because of the other priorities I have in my life. But while I am here and I have some free time, we're going to talk about college football. I'm going to talk about each of the Power Five conferences, who I see winning, and I'm going to do my best to be reasonable and logical. I am an Oklahoma fan. I'm obviously wearing Oklahoma gear, but I will try to be as logical as possible and explain my reasoning behind why some teams um, may not get the you why they get the rating they get from me. So we're going to go by conference in the Power Five. I'm not going to really talk about a group of five schools. We'll start here with the ACC. Boston College, Clemson, Duke, Florida State, Georgia Tech, Louisville, Miami, NC State, North Carolina, Pittsburgh, Syracuse, Virginia Tech, and Wake Forest. Um, Out of these schools, I mean, there's a few that are interesting, but really only two that are conference that have the really I believe have the roster to win the conference, and that's Florida State and Clemson. I'm picking Clemson. One, there's the it's hard to it's hard to overrate um, the experience of been there, done that with a coaching staff like Dabo Sweeney has, and just his experience there. And then he only got better with bringing in Garrett Riley, and now with Klubnik. Now Garrett Riley was at TCU last year, and he did a good job with, I think, an inferior roster to what he has at Clemson. Um, the tough part that Clemson's going to have is there's not a really a standout wide receiver, and honestly, their wide receiver core, just from what I've seen, unless they've improved from last season to this season, there may be some struggle stretching the field for Cade Klubnik. But Garrett Riley is a good offensive coordinator and is excellent at using his weapons to their fullest potential and using looks and schemes to um, get the most out of his guys. So I think Clemson is going to win the conference. I think Florida State will be very good, but I think that the experience of Clemson and um, the additions they did make, at least in the offensive coordinator spot, is really going to help them. Um, let's go to the Pac-12. Pac-12 is interesting because we've got multiple teams here that have a real shot to win the conference. Um, you have Arizona State, Arizona, California, Colorado, Oregon State, Stanford, UCLA, USC, Utah, Washington, and Washington State. Um, of these, I'm going to highlight a few teams. Of course, you have the Oregon Ducks, who are going to be better than ever, or not better than ever, but better in the second year under Dan Lanning. They have a experienced quarterback back there who um, and a pretty good defense and I think they can be real conference contenders. Um, Oregon State, kind of sneaky team that really, uh, to a lot of people outside of the Pac-12, wasn't really being noticed, especially until last year. And then suddenly you look up and they're having a really good season. And that roster has quite a few upperclassmen and key positions, and I think they could at least surprise some teams and knock some teams off. USC. Now, here's where people are probably going to accuse me of my Oklahoma bias, just dislike for Lincoln Riley. Lincoln Riley, I still do not like him. I'll give him his due. He's the best, probably the best offensive coordinator in the country. Um, but people think that his defense is going to improve because he's got better players there now. Um, you, I think Lincoln Riley's whole methodology is wrong when it comes to defense. His defense is never really improved at Oklahoma. They would go up sometimes in the rankings from year to year, um, but it seems like there was always just very troublesome, pesky issues that never really went away. No matter how much they tried to coach those issues out, I think it's a mentality. I think it's a culture that is fostered. And I heard, uh, I've heard a few people say that it may start with the Lincoln Riley, or it may start with his strength and conditioning coach who doesn't train his guys in the right way. It may start with Alex Grinch. There's a whole lot of accusations being thrown around as to why there's the issue there. But Lincoln Riley has a very talented roster, and Caleb Williams is the best quarterback in the country. I really like Caleb Williams. I don't blame him at all for leaving Oklahoma. I mean, if I were in his shoes and the coach that recruited me went to another school and then came to me and said, "Hey, if you come to this school, you're going to have some of the best receivers in the country. You're going to play an easier schedule, and you're going to be you're going to be in a better NIL state, well, a better NIL city." The taxes in California, of course, make it a little more problematic with NIL and all that. But I can't say I exactly blame him. He made the decision that he had to make for himself, and so I don't blame Caleb Williams. I like him, and in some cases I even root for him. And when he makes it to the NFL, I probably will most likely root for him there. Um, Going on to the Utah Utes. The issue here is Cam Rising's injury. I haven't heard any updates. I do know that, to best of my knowledge, he is out of the game against Florida this week. So that could be a interesting wait and see what happens there. I think if Cam Rising comes back and is healthy before a game against Utah, he will or against USC, he will cause them issues. The reason why I think Utah will continue to cause USC issues is because going back to Lincoln Riley's time at Oklahoma, there was 2 years, I believe 2 years in a row, where he lost to Kansas State, and it was almost like deja vu watching Oklahoma against Kansas State, just watching the the same issues from one year to the next year um, against Kansas State, and how um, Chris Kleinman just knows how to capitalize, how to use how to find that weakness and use it against Lincoln Riley's offense and his defense. So I think Utah they found the recipe because they beat them twice last year, and I don't think USC can solve that issue against Utah. I don't think they can solve the mystery there, and I think they will end up losing again to Utah this year. Washington Huskies. They have probably the dark horse candidate for the Heisman there, and Michael Penix. And they have excellent wide receivers. They have a fairly good defense. I like their coach, and I think that they are a real championship contender. Now I'm gonna check the schedules real quick here, just to kind of say, just to see where these teams play each other. So, let's see. So for the Ducks, their schedule, I want to see which one of these how many of these teams are on their schedule exactly. So we do have a Washington matchup at Washington. I'm gonna give Oregon the loss at Washington. It's going to be a tough place to play. Washington, that stadium can get very loud. I think Utah could be interesting. I'm going to give Oregon the win against Utah on the road, and I'm going to give them the loss to USC. So that gives them 2 losses, and I'll give them the win against Oregon State. That's my prediction on how those matchups will go. I think they'll go 2-2 in those against those other 4 top teams in that conference. So let's see, going down here again, Oregon State. They're going to have. I mean, I guess I could have just pulled this up on my phone and then said when the games were. Oregon State, I think they'll take a loss to Utah. I think they lose against Utah, Washington, and Oregon. I think they take a loss to those 3 teams, and they don't face USC. So, which may be lucky for USC considering how last year's game went, and the fact that Oregon State made that game a lot closer than probably anybody in the country expected. So I think Oregon State might lose all 3 of these games. If they win any of them, I think their best chance at winning any of these games is maybe Washington, because the Washington game will be at home instead of going to play in Seattle. Going back to this, we'll talk about Utah and USC briefly. This video will be a little bit rough as far as, like, I'm not going to really edit it. I'm just going to give you my thoughts long form, and then if you want to skip through and find your team, and you can check out what I say about them, and then yell at me in the comments about why I'm an idiot. So USC already has, of course, they have the win against San Jose State. Like I said, USC's defense is problematic, and because of that, I'm looking at Notre Dame. And Notre Dame, I mean, Sam Hartman looks so good on Saturday, just really, really good. So I'm actually gonna give USC the loss to Notre Dame and Utah back to back. I think they win against Washington and win against Oregon. So I think they lose Notre Dame and Utah back to back. One, because Notre Dame, I think they just out-tough them, and Utah. I think both those teams had the recipe of just be out-tough USC. Washington and Oregon, I just don't know if they have the defensive personnel or the scheme really to beat USC. I think if either of those teams has a chance to beat USC, it's maybe Washington. I think Washington has the offense to run with USC and to really take advantage of their defense. Um, and lastly, we'll talk about Washington. I gave Washington the loss to Oregon and the loss to Washington and to USC. So I don't think they play Utah. They may. I may have that wrong. Yes, they do play Utah. So I think Washington beats Oregon. Or no. I'm trying to remember what I said on that one. I may have that wrong. Okay, I think Washington does beat Oregon. I think they win that rivalry game. I do think they lose to USC. I think they beat Utah in Seattle because that's a home game for them, and I think they beat Oregon State. So out of those games, I think they beat Oregon, beat Utah, and Oregon State. They lose to USC. I think this sends them to the conference championship game. As far as who wins the conference, I'm having a hard time not picking Utah to repeat or Washington. I think Washington will be very, very good this year, and I think they've got the upperclassmen where they need it to win. We're going to go on to the Big 12 now, and I'll try to move a little quicker through this one, probably because as I see it, there's really only 3 teams worth talking about. No offense to the other teams, but 3 teams talking about for the conference championship. I think these other teams will be very interesting. I just see issues and problems why I see why they could be an issue. Kansas State. Let's check their schedule. I think Kansas State will be very good. I think Chris Klieman is potentially the best or second best coach in the conference. I'm the reason why I say second best is I'll explain a little later. So Kansas State does not play any of either of the top teams. Well, really any of the top teams besides TCU and Texas. Their schedule's pretty favorable. I'm just going to say it. I don't really believe in TCU without Garrett Riley and Max Duggan. I know people talk about Chandler Morris. I haven't seen it yet with Chandler Morris, and I don't want to say that last year was a flash in the pan necessarily. I just think that they got a perfect storm of just everything came together perfectly. That's probably the wrong phrase there. Everything came together perfectly for TCU last year. They were a good team, and I mean kudos to them for beating Michigan. Like, good job. But everything had to go perfectly last year for them to go to the playoff, and they didn't even win the conference. So I think Kansas State does beat TCU, and I don't think the game will be as close as some people think. I think Chris Klieman, like I said, is the best or second best coach in the conference. When it comes to Texas, I'll explain my issues with Texas in a minute. I think that Kansas State will lose this game. I think they will lose to Texas. Now I'm going to go back and we'll talk about Texas' schedule here in a minute. I'm seeing a lot of people rate Texas very highly and give them all this credit for their roster. I just want to talk about a few things here with Texas. Okay, first off, they're going to get everybody knows about the Alabama game. Um, I'm gonna pull up some stats on my phone, and I'll read them off to you. Um, from last year. I know last year was last year, and you're not supposed to really think about it too much. Um, let's see. Look at his college football stats. Okay. Here. All right. So Alabama, give them the loss there. And then we come down to Oklahoma. I'm giving them the loss to Oklahoma. And you can call me a homer if you want, but I'm going to read off some stats to you. 1,580 yards rushing. That was Bijan Robinson last year. 1,580 yards rushing. Now, receiving, Bijan Robinson, 314. Combined, you have over 1,900 yards. Quinn Ewers last year, 2,177 yards, 15 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. And yes, I do know that he got hurt, and he was out for, what was it, one game, 2 games? No, he was out for like a game and a half, 2 games, maybe even up to 3 games. He was out. He was out for a little bit. My issues with all of that, and you can talk about Xavier Worthy and like what he did. Let's see, he played 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. He played 10 games. Quinn Ewers played 10 games. The most yards he threw for was against Oklahoma State, and against Oklahoma State, he had 3 interceptions, and they lost by a touchdown. So my issue, people are hyping up Texas roster and saying how good their roster is, and keep talking about how great Quinn Ewers is. I don't believe in Quinn Ewers, and more than that, I don't believe in Steve Sarkisian. How many times is this coach going to get excuses made for him? He's been fired from 2 jobs, and then supposedly went to Alabama and got fixed, and then comes to the Big 12, and everybody's like, "Oh, he's like Texas is back. They're going to turn it around this year. We're gonna see what Texas can really be." He has not won 10 games ever in his coaching career ever. He has excuses made for him. He talks a big talk, and he's talking about how much everybody hates Texas and how, embrace the hate and all this. Well, until you can prove that you can win more than 10 games and that you know how to actually develop players, no, I'm not going to believe in you. You can call me a homer because I'm an Oklahoma fan. I think I've been fairly logical and reasonable here. They lost their best running back. And yes, they have Xavier Worthy, and Xavier Worthy is one of the best wide receivers in the country. But Quinn Ewers, it almost seemed, and it's not just me saying this, like he got almost worse as the season went last year. His highlight was against Texas, but it felt like as the season went on, more and more defenses and more teams, like defensive coordinators, started to figure him out. And he lost to Washington. We've already said Washington was a good team. Washington is a good team, but they lost in the bowl game against Washington, and he pretty much got embarrassed against Oklahoma State. And yes, he threw for 300 yards, but he threw 3 interceptions, and they lost that game. Guess who beat Oklahoma State? Oklahoma. I know it's not, I know one, it doesn't all equal out like that, but there's issues with Texas, and I feel like they're getting glossed over by the national media because they're not looking at last year and then looking at Sarkisian's track record. Texas is Texas has issues, and maybe they'll fix them this year. Maybe they will. Maybe I'll have to, eat crow on this one. But I don't see uh, I don't think Texas is going to I don't think Texas is going to be as good as what everybody says they're going to be. I don't think they're going undefeated in conference. I think they could very potentially drop 2 games. I think they could very easily lose to Kansas State and Oklahoma. I think they could potentially lose to Baylor. I think Baylor's um, a sleeping bear. Like, I mean, bit of a joke there because of Baylor's, the Baylor Bears. But like, I do think Baylor could surprise them. I think they could have a bit of a hangover after the Alabama game, and it could be like they could drop one to Baylor. I think Kansas might surprise them. I think Kansas will be pretty good. I don't think Kansas is going to. I think Kansas will take a couple losses. I think they'll take 3 losses in conference. But I do think that you know that in gearing up for Oklahoma, Texas could overlook Kansas and get surprised at home. I think Kansas State or TCU. I think any one of these teams. Texas Tech is going to be good. Texas Tech could beat Texas any given Saturday. I just don't have faith in Texas to do everything that everybody's projecting them to do. And Sarkisian's talking about embrace the hate. Well, I'm not hearing any hate coming their way. The only hate I'm hearing is from Big 12 fans saying, "Hey, like, what's going on here?" And Texas is getting all this hype. And anyways, it just feels very much overblown, and I don't think that Sarkisian has the ability to use these quote unquote rat poison that Saban talks about and be able to twist that and motivate his players like Saban does. I just don't think he does. So I guess um, I don't believe in Sark. I don't believe in Ewers, and I could be very wrong, but they're gonna have to show me. They're gonna have to show me and several other people that they can be believed in. Now I'm going to try and be as fair as possible about my Oklahoma Sooners, and I could joke and say that they're going undefeated, and I don't think anybody really believes that. Even me. I do think they have a chance in every single game they play this year. I think that their roster is miles better than it was last year, especially against Texas. I mean, even like they actually have a backup quarterback that can throw a pass now. They do. So where I'm looking at their team and what I see. I think, of course, Arkansas State's a W, SMU W, Tulsa W, Cincinnati W, Iowa State W, because Iowa State, their roster's wrecked from this whole gambling scandal. I think they beat Texas. I think they beat UCF. I think the game at Kansas is going to be the stumbling block. Of all these teams on this schedule, people talk about Oklahoma State. I've heard a couple people talk about Oklahoma State being the one where Oklahoma loses. I don't think Gundy has the quarterback or the skill. I don't want to say the skill. I don't think he has the talent. And Oklahoma will be geared up for this because it's a rivalry game. I think Kansas could be the trip up because it's going to be It's going to be between Texas and Oklahoma State. It's going to be between those two games, and they have a good team, a better team than some people expect, because they all think Kansas is bad. Their coach is great. Their coach is very good. I believe in their coach. I think that you'll have a loud stadium, um, yelling at the Sooners, because the Sooners are leaving next year, and I think that's where Oklahoma loses. I think Oklahoma loses to Kansas. I think they win Oklahoma State, West Virginia, BYU, and at TCU. So my final prediction on what the Big 12 is going to look like, I think the Big 12 championship game is going to be Kansas State and Oklahoma. I do believe Brent Venables is. I think the top coach in the conference comes down to Brent Venables and Kleinman. Now, once Oklahoma's starts getting their recruiting up, and we'll see. I think, of course, Oklahoma will be gone by then, but I Kleinman is an excellent coach, and I think it comes down to those two coaches, and I have a hard time saying which one is better, just considering how long each one has been in their job and what they've done with their recruiting and coaching their players. Um, so that's how I see it. I think Kansas State wins the Big 12. That's my prediction. Um, Now I'm going to go ahead and I think I'm just going to go ahead and go through the schedule on my phone, or I guess we can do it on my computer. Um, Alabama. I'm just going to give my predictions on these just to move it along. I think Alabama wins the SEC West, but I think I could see them taking a loss potentially somewhere in there. LSU is very talented. I just, from year to year, teams get better and they get worse. And I think Alabama, in some ways, got better. And you can say, Bryce Young's gone. I think they got better defensively. I think that they're going to have a. I think they're out to prove some people wrong. So I'm going to pick Alabama to win the SEC West. I think LSU will have a very good season. I think they'll finish right behind them. And then we'll move on to the SEC East. This is everybody wants to pencil in Georgia right away, and yes, I do think Georgia wins the conference. But I could also see the Volunteers making it interesting. It all depends on their quarterback. Like what's going to be going on in that Tennessee quarterback room? Are we going to see Joe Milton? Are we going to see that new kid out of Hawaii, the 5-star? It just kind of depends on that. I think the game, with the game being in Knoxville this year, I think there's an honest. I think there's an honest worry for Georgia, because I think Georgia could potentially lose that game. I don't think that you can't just assume that Georgia's going to be able to roll on and do a three-peat after losing the amount of players they lost on their roster. And yes, I know they recruit extremely well, but Stetson Bennett's been tearing it up in the NFL in the preseason, and I think he was more of a factor to that team's success than some people give him credit for. So my final two teams are Alabama and Georgia again, but this time I think Alabama takes the win and wins wins the SEC. Go ahead and hate on me, all you Georgia fans. I welcome it. I embrace the views. I embrace your comments. Thank you. Okay, moving on to our final conference that we'll talk about. We're going to talk about the Big Ten. I'm going to go ahead and just roll through these quick. Just the teams that I think are going to be interesting in this conference, and I think everybody knows who the four are. We have the Michigan Wolverines, the Ohio State Buckeyes, Penn State Nittany Lions, and the Wisconsin Badgers. I've compared Ryan Day to Lincoln Riley, and there's good things and bad things to that. One, he's an excellent offensive, like incredible offensive minded coach. There's also bad sides. I feel like defense and toughness on that team has regressed every year since Urban Meyer left. And I'm no Urban Meyer fan, but the team has seemed like it's gotten noticeably worse, even though they're still recruiting at an incredibly high level. And it seems like they have insane players on their team. They have uh, Marvin Harrison Jr. and just insanely talented players. Jackson Smith and Jigba was there for. I know he was hurt last year, but the year before that he was there. It's just they have so much talent. They Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson, like two top receivers in the NFL, and then JSN was showing out in Seattle before his injury. It's just Ohio State needs to I think they need to rediscover their identity. And I do think that they will lose again to the Wolverines. And I think they lose to the Nittany Lions too. I think they lose to Penn State and Nebraska, or Penn State and Michigan, and which would shock Ohio State to the point where I think Ryan Day's job would at least be getting called for by the fans, even if maybe he really wasn't on the hot seat per se. I think he'll take I think that they'll lose both. Now, as far as the Michigan Penn State game, I think Michigan does win that one. But depending on where it's played, I'm trying to remember if it's going to be in Happy Valley or if it's going to be Ann Arbor. I think that could actually have a huge effect on it. So Michigan plays at Penn State. Ooh, that game could be the game of the year. Potentially, I think that game could be game of the year between those two teams. Honestly, since it's in Happy Valley, I think it's more of a coin flip. I think this game could go either way. I'm going to give it to Michigan because I think Jim Harbaugh has the best team that he's had since he's been there, and I think that'll that will win the game. But I think it'll be an incredibly close game. Wisconsin will be fun to see. We've got a new coach there, new quarterback. It's just going to be very interesting. I think that they're going to be. I think they're going to be pretty good, and I think they'll actually win in the NFC West or the NFC West. I'm sorry, I'm already on to the NFL. I think they'll win the Big Ten West, and I think the conference championship game will be Wisconsin versus Michigan, and of course Michigan will win that. Just more talented and probably a better coach. No offense to Wisconsin. I think my college football playoff teams will be Alabama, Michigan, Washington, and I think Georgia does get in there over a Big 12 team. Even if I think Georgia's built up too much of a reputation with the committee I don't think that Kansas State or Oklahoma or whoever wins the Big 12 will get enough credit for that. The only potential shot I see is if Texas somehow does manage to win all those games and then beat Alabama out of conference. I think that's where they definitely will make sure that they get in. But since in my predictions, I don't think Texas gets there. I think it'll be Alabama, Georgia, Michigan, and Washington. That's my prediction for that. I don't think Clemson has the schedule is just so soft, and if they take one loss, I think that the committee will leave them out. Uh, they potentially could get in over, say, Georgia if they perform well enough, and Georgia does not win the conference. If they perform well enough, and the committee really likes what they've seen, there's just so much of the eye test with this committee. It feels like it's not extremely objective at times, and um, SEC bias does exist. Um, and I'm going to be happy when Oklahoma is getting that bias for them, but it does exist. And Georgia, with what they've done in the playoff, and the SEC favoritism by networks and the views. I mean, the past playoff games have been getting like an SEC team has been in every single playoff game, every national championship game. Um, Sometimes you even have two SEC teams in national championship games. The thing is those games get a ton of views, and SEC teams pull just enormous amount of views, and so it's at the end of the day, it's all about the money, and I think the committee will favor two SEC teams over, say, an ACC team, even if they have um, one loss. I think the ACC or the SEC gets that favoritism. Anyways, y'all, I know that this has been a bit rambling and just kind of just a bit disorganized, but I wanted to get on here before college football gets started in earnest and give my reasons and my thoughts. I'll try to we'll try to do a video about the NFL and just kind of talking about where I see that going. Um, I probably, I guarantee you, I didn't get a lot of this stuff right, and I'm sure that I'll be surprised by a lot of things that happen throughout the season. But that's why the game's played, because it's not just a paper. It's fun to talk about. It's fun to speculate, and all that, and it's fun to just joke with your friends. But right now, that's all that it is. It's all speculation until uh, the ball gets kicked off. Once that ball gets kicked off, anything can happen any given Saturday. Any team can lose. We've seen it over and over again. But good luck to your team this year, unless you're Texas. And Boomer Sooner. And I'll rock the horns down on this video. Sorry, Texas fans. Not sorry. Y'all enjoy the season and have a good day.